That's page 1. Page 2, which is the back side of the page for you guys. Discuss the difference between HAVCOM label requirements for commercially poured chemical in its original packaging container and other workplace chemical containers such as stationary containers, portable containers, and piping systems. What this is talking about is a lot of times your chemicals are going to be shipped to you in some kind of shipping container. What the company packs it up and sends it to you. And then you're going to pour it into something else. So what you pour it into has to be identified or has to be labeled to identify exactly what's in there. Okay? So what are some examples we might do this with?
Roundup.
The Mr. Yuck stick.
Roundup. Okay? Roundup, very good. You buy that in 55-gallon drums. You'll pour a little bit in a cup and add so many cups of water, mix it up, and then you've got whatever percent Roundup you need. Okay, that's a good one. A lot of times it doesn't have to be added stuff, okay? But actually your example was really good because now it's not the original stuff that came out of the container, okay? But if it's like a 55-gallon drum of oil, okay, and you have a little pump and pump it out into a little, squeeze can or squirt bottle or something that's maybe a quart or something like that, that bottle has to be labeled with the identical stuff. Not everything, but the pertinent information, which we'll talk about here.
So
Okay.
Sharpie
Do what?
So just writing on it with a Sharpie wouldn't be sufficient.
Actually, if that's how you identify it in your hazardous communication program, then it is acceptable. But there are instances where, and we did that out at the site, where you can't put a label on there, but it's got to be specified, and usually that's not allowed. But where we had to transport stuff into radiological boxes, and you had gloves you had to reach in, you mixed it inside there, so you had a specific dilution, and you couldn't take it back out because now it's potentially contaminated. So what we did is, and this was legal, we took, and it's exactly what we used, a black Sharpie, and we wrote on the bottle exactly what it was. Yeah, Joe?
And the Pacific Core, they have them color-coded. Like you have 5-gallon drums with all the MSDS information on front of the drum with the color code, and then they put the color code 5-gallon jugs to share out the plant.
Okay, that'd work as long as, but the jugs still have to be identified, but that color coding, that would prevent screw-ups and stuff, because, I mean, if you have everything in a white 1-gallon jug, then eventually somebody's going to go oops and grab the wrong jug. If they're both sitting here and you're mixing here and reach back behind you, grab the wrong jug without checking, then yeah, that could happen. So that's not a bad idea. Okay, so the commercially produced chemical, you have to identify the chemical, hazard warnings, name and address of the chemical manufacturer, the person who makes it or is responsible for it. Okay, when you label stuff in your work areas, okay, and this is what you'll pour it out or transport it out of the commercial package. If it's stationary, you got to have a hazard warning that includes message, picture, symbol. Just let you know what the hazards are. Portable container, no label requiring if transferred to a portable container for the immediate use of the employee who makes the transfer. So if I'm using it and I got to go add this much stuff, I can take a jug that's authorized for that use, open the little valve, fill it up, take it right over and pour it in. Then I don't have to label it, okay? But I have to be the one who fills it and empties it, okay? And I can't lose control of it in the middle because then I can't verify that it's in there. Once you set it down and store it for a while, it's no longer portable, okay? And then, I don't know if you can read that one. Pipes or piping systems, engines, fuel tanks, okay, not considered to be containers. So your gas tank doesn't have to be marked gassed, or your storage tank does, okay? 4, identify at least 5 pieces of information found in each MSDS, and you can just, we should all be able just to throw something out there, okay? Physical hazards, health hazards, exposure hazards, how it gets into you, precautions for use, emergency and first aid, spill problems, must be in English and include information regarding specific chemical identities and combinations. Okay, so you guys should all be able to come up with something like that. And there's the standard, subpart Z.
I know.
Okay. Now I just hit this button here. All right. I apologize for not having those in there. I'll make sure I put them in. Okay, HAZCOM. There's some examples of stuff. Okay. You might have the chemical. Okay, if that's what it's most known by, that should be on there. If it's most known by sulfuric acid, that should be on there. Both doesn't hurt. Okay. Drain cleaner, corrosive. Okay. Any picture labels is okay. That's what they're talking about, picture labels. So that's just some examples of some lids. And what's this right here? That looks like a battery. That looks like. Let's pour some Coke on it. Okay, overview. We did the overviews. Introduction. 32 million workers. How many people are in America?
300 million.
300 million. So what's this, about a little more than a tenth?
10%.
Okay, 10% of people in the country potentially exposed to one or more chemical hazards. 650,000 products, and they're making new ones all the time. Exposure, serious health effects, heart ailments, central nervous system damage, kidney and lung. A lot of this stuff doesn't happen right away. It happens over years. So you might think you're okay, and 10 years down the road start having trouble breathing, or some kind of nervous system, or some kind of breathing or pumping, heart pumping or something like that happens because of exposure that happened years before. So it's kind of important to protect yourself right away, because you don't know how bad it's going to affect you long term. Other ones may cause safety hazards, which fires, explosions, and serious accidents. Remember, certain metals don't like water, violent explosions and fires, that kind of stuff. So, purpose of OSHA's hazard communication standard: to ensure employers and employees know about work hazards and how to protect themselves so that the incidence of illness. Okay, we already talked about that. You got a written program, you label the containers, and you have the MSDS, which is your kind of Bible to that specific chemical. Who is covered? Everybody. Okay, anybody who works around hazardous chemicals is covered by OSHA. Okay, now you have separate ones for MSHA, for mining. You have agriculture. I don't remember what that one is. But everybody's covered somewhere by OSHA. Employers' responsibilities. You have to identify and list the hazardous chemicals in your workplace. Okay, that's one of the learning objectives. Obtain MSDS and labels for each chemical. Okay. Implement a written HAZCOM program including those labels, MSDSs, and part of that program is to train employees. Communicate hazardous information to employees through labels, MSDS, formal training. Okay, that kind of sounds the same, implement and communicate, but by implementing something, you have to make sure that the employees know what is implemented. That's how serious it is. So if I just tell you something, I don't verify you learned it, okay, then you haven't learned it and we haven't communicated. So communication is two-way. You have to demonstrate you have the knowledge and stuff. So this is, more and more HAZCOM is getting to be a big deal in play. This wasn't, a couple years ago, wasn't required by OSHA training, but now it is. How can workplace hazards be minimized? Thorough hazard assessment. That should be the #1 step in your job, is to do a hazard assessment. So see what type of chemicals you use, what is the environment around it, okay? If you're using this chemical that reacts with this metal, and 4 feet away you got a lathe that cuts into this metal, you probably don't want to use that chemical, right? So, a hazard assessment isn't just what's right in front of you, it's things that could happen, through the course of using these chemicals. So, hazard assessment is a little more involved than just saying, yep, we're going to be using gas, okay? Think about ventilation, okay? Think about lighting. Do you have enough lighting to mix it, okay? So, think about sparks. Is there anything that can produce sparks? So, there's a lot more that goes into hazard assessment. So that's the first thing you can do. Employers rely on evaluations performed by the manufacturers or importers to establish the hazards of chemicals they use. So you kind of gotta, basically what they're saying is that the employers are going to make their program based on the information that the people supplying the chemicals give them. MSDS and labels. The written, why is this program required? Make sure all the employers get the information and inform and train their employees. Written HAZCOM program. Describe container labeling, MSDS, and employee training for each workplace. So every workplace, it doesn't have to be one building, it could be isolated areas inside the building. You got to have, and you go over the container labeling, MSDSs, what's in them, how to read them, how to use the stuff that's in them, and where they're located, and document the training for each work area. List of the chemicals and make all the information available. So that's just post it in the common place, not in the boss's bottom shelf in his office. How must chemicals be labeled? Each container entering the workplace must be labeled with, and this is the shipping. Okay, this is what the shipper has to have on there. Identity of the chemical, appropriate hazards, and name and address of who or the responsible party. Either who manufactures it or who transports it or ships it or imports it. Whoever's responsible for getting that stuff there. Labeling in the workplace. This is a continuation. This is just re-emphasizing what we talked about earlier. Hazard warning can be any type of message, picture, or symbol that provides information on the hazard of the chemicals and the targeted organs affected if applicable. Part of that is, I mean, if I have a label that's corrosive, that's okay. But I have, as employees, I have to know what that means. Okay, so training has to go along with that picture, and you have to have posted somewhere so I can break out this picture and say I got corrosion, I got that, looks like 1814 or whatever, 1814, something like that. That's not the year it was made, that's a chemical identification. So part of using pictures, if you use them and it's legal, you have to have the training and the identification that goes along with it. Labels must be legible in English and any other languages if needed and displayed prominently. MSDS, we talked about a lot of this, physical, health, routes of exposure, precautions, emergency and first aid, control measures. Must be in English, include all the specific information regarding the specific chemical, all this other stuff, physical and chemical parameters, health effects, exposure limits, cancer causing stuff, identification, and readily accessible. I don't remember if I've seen something like that or not. That's one version of the MSDS. It's got the different sections in there. But you guys all have them from the introduction. So that's the one in the introduction is more universal. They're going to that format. They have no prescribed format. If no MSDS has been received for a hazardous chemical, the employer must contact the supplier, manufacturer, importer to obtain one and maintain a record of the contact. Okay, but sometimes, if you've got all the instructions have these little like pie and all these geometric shapes and stuff, tracking it down might be more difficult. So go to somebody you know has it. Training is required for employees who are exposed to hazardous chemicals in their work area. This is when you have to have training at the time of initial assignment. So when you get assigned there, you have to have training on that area. And then when something changes in that area, you have to have training. Okay? A new hazard introduced. What training is needed to protect workers? Explanation of the HAZCOM, all the labels, MSDS. This is a lot.